You guys asked for it, so today, that's what we're gonna do. Full gear tour. What's in my racks? Okay, so today in this video, we're gonna go over every single piece of gear that's in my racks. I'm gonna briefly tell you what I use it for, and then we're gonna go over interfaces, patch bays, and how everything is actually hooked up and patched up. There are a lot of people asking about how I'm using the Flock patch in conjunction with the TT patch bays and how all of that is wired up into the interface. So we're gonna go over all of that stuff. This is probably not gonna be a short video because there's a lot to talk about. So if you don't have time to watch it now, totally cool. Just add it to your watch later and come back when you got some time. Because this is going to be a fun one. Who doesn't love a good gear tour video? Now, I will put links down below for every single piece of gear I talk about in this video. So if you're interested in seeing prices, specs, maybe picking something up for yourself, there'll be a link in the description for absolutely everything. Okay, let's jump right into it. Okay, where to start? Front rack, back rack? I think... Let's start in the front rack. Now, the first thing that I should probably point out is that there's a very specific reason why every piece of gear, why I decided to put every piece of gear where it is. And it is purely about what I need to use when I'm mixing and mastering. So all of this gear in the front rack here, this is all stuff that I'm really tweaking while mixing or while mastering, and I want it right in front of me so that way I don't have to move out of the sweet spot of the monitors to hear the changes that I'm being made, as opposed to the back rack where all of this stuff I'd have to turn all the way around, face the opposite direction of the monitors in order to change anything in here. And so for that reason, everything in this rack is reserved for tracking, or it's stuff that like doesn't need a lot of tweaking. There's not much experimentation, but we'll get onto that. Okay, so first up, my signature preamps. These are made by Cappies. We affectionately call these the Cappy Runes. I've done a whole video on these, and these live on my mix bus. They just add size, color, saturation, apparent volume. They're absolutely amazing on the mix bus, and I have 4 of them. So these right here are for mixing, and then I have another pair back here for tracking whenever I'm actually tracking stuff. Next up, Serpent SB4001. Now this has been my mix bus compressor forever, for like 7 years maybe, and it sounds absolutely amazing. Highly recommend it. SSL style, actual true quad compressor with a bunch of like extra settings where you've got a wet dry blend and a bunch of extra attack and release settings. However, this is no longer my main mix bus compressor, even though I still use it a lot, and we'll get onto that. All right, next up, the SPL Big. Now, I did a video on this like quite a while ago. Stereo widener. Absolutely amazing. I use this on my mix bus and when mastering all the time, and it's amazing for making stuff wider and bigger sounding. Next up, whole bunch of Cappy stuff. So we've got the Cappy LC40 EQ. I use this on kick a whole bunch. Cappy FC526 compressor. I use this on kick a whole bunch. Cappy LC25 EQ, and I use this on snare a whole bunch. Cappy FC526 compressor, which I use on snare a whole bunch, and the Cappy BT50, which I use on vocals pretty often. Now, why the LC40 and the LC25? It's really about the frequency points. So LC40 has 40 Hertz, 80 Hertz, 160. I like 40 and 80 on kick drum. As opposed to the LC25, we've got 25, 50, 100, 200. And as you can see, 100 and 200, that's the snare drum magic. So that's why I have those 2 different EQs and I use them on different things. Next up, Rupert Neve Designs MBT. Now this, I have a full video on this and it is amazing. We've got a high pass, some EQ, like a vibey color compressor. We've got a width knob and we've got super silk, blue and red silk at the same time on the mix bus. So this is on my mix bus for probably 70% of songs, and I master with it too when it calls for it. Next up, the SSL Fusion. Now this is these two are really similar. These two are like almost competitors. And so what's interesting is there are times when the MBT doesn't feel like the right mix, the right move, and almost 100% of the time when that is the case, the Fusion does feel like the right move. So these are very complementary to each other, even though they do pretty similar jobs. It's like I'm always using one or the other. So that's very cool. The solid state logic Fusion, as you guys probably know, we've got some saturation, we've got a little bit of EQ, some widening, and some stereo image and a high frequency compressor, and some more transformer love right there. Up top, radio power conditioner. You're gonna see a bunch of those. Next up, literally my holy grail EQ, the SPL PQ. Now, I have been using the plug-in version of this on my mix bus and when mastering for a really long time, and finally got my hands on a hardware. You guys have heard me in videos say that I'm looking for a hardware one for months and months now. Finally got one, and this thing is ridiculous. Yes, it sounds better than the plug-in to me. Yes, there will be a video coming. Yes, it's absolutely incredible. So this is on my mix bus when I'm mixing, and I master with this as well. And it's stunning. There'll be a whole video coming on it for sure. Next up, the SSL Bus Plus. Now, this is something that I was really curious about after I went over to Andrew Master's place, and he had one. And it was so versatile and sounded so good that I was just like, I think I want one. So I got one in, and it has replaced my Serpent for the standard mix bus because it's so versatile. We got low THD, we've got feedback or feed forward, we've got 4K mode, and a bunch of different distortion settings in the 4K mode. We've got lots and lots of different attack and release and ratio settings that the original SSL didn't have, and actually even more settings than the Serpent has, which is one of the reasons why I picked the Serpent originally, is because it had so many extra settings. Well, now we're really going here. It does mid-side, it's got dynamic EQ, it's got like all kinds of stuff in it. There will absolutely be a video coming on that very soon. Next up, my holy grail compressor. This needs a video. I've had this for 12 years now, and I've threatened to make a video about it, but I believe that this might be the finest compressor ever made, and it lived on my drum bus absolutely forever. Every vocal I've tracked in the past 12 years has been tracked through this compressor. I use it in mixing, I use it when mastering. Like, that's my holy grail compressor right there, and I've had it absolutely forever. One of, if not the most underrated compressors ever made. I cannot recommend this enough. All right. Next bay, we have got the Rupert Neve Design Newton channel strips. I have a whole video on these as well, and they get used all the time for all the reasons that I said in the video originally. I use them on vocals, I use them on kick, I use them on snare, I use them on bass guitar. They're just good sounding. The EQ, specifically the low EQ, and more specifically the way the low end plays with the high pass together, is so good. And then the compressor is so much more usable than you would think it is for a 3-knob compressor. It's very good. The other thing is we got some silk here, and you can choose between red or blue, but the other thing that makes these really cool is they have a plus or a -6 output, which I have it permanently attached to, which means you drive the channel strip harder than you would normally be able to get more color and more saturation, and they're amazing. Next up, needs no introduction, Universal Audio 1176. I have several videos on this, going over the secrets of compression, comparing this to a Blue Stripe and a Revision F, comparing it to plugins. Phenomenal compressor, and very often, at least 50% of the time, it's the main compressor on the vocal when I'm mixing. Next up, Distressor. It doesn't need any introduction. You guys know the Distressor's an iconic compressor, and I use it all the time on vocals. I use it all the time on bass guitar. I use it all the time on kick and snare. Kind of just depends on the vibe that I'm feeling for this compressor, but they're amazing. Next up is the SPL Vitalizer Mark III. Now, I have a whole video on this, and it is some serious mix bus magic. It's so good at creating clarity on a mix or on a master without it ever sounding harsh. I don't know how they do it, but it's amazing. And also this bass knob right here, I really, really like. This bass knob turned just a little bit soft. It sounds really good. Next up, the SPL Auto Dynamic S Cancellation De-esser Mark II. Now, this was not something that I bought. This is not something that SPL sent me. I did the Rig Builders build off with Archie Beats at Sweetwater, and at the end of that video, they gave us an entire signal chain, which was crazy. This was one of the pieces in it, and it doesn't have a video yet. It may get a video, but it's really, really good at de-essing. It's fairly intelligent. It sounds extremely natural. I guess the secret to it is it flips the polarity on the sibilants and then blends it back in. So it doesn't sound like slurry. It doesn't sound like someone has a lisp. It just turns the sibilants down, and it's very, very good. Next up from that, another radial power conditioner. Okay, before we get on to the back rack and how the patch bays are routed, the computer, the interfaces, all the gear, I just want to remind you that there are links down below for all of this gear, and just about all of those links go to Sweetwater, because Sweetwater's sponsoring this video. So anytime you guys need any piece of musical gear, even if it's not one of these pieces, you can jump on any one of my videos, click on any one of the links in the description below, and purchase anything that you need once you're on the site. It costs you absolutely nothing extra. But when you do that, it goes a long ways to help support me and help me keep making content like this. And I really, really appreciate it. So anytime you guys need any piece of musical gear, click on any video, click on any one of the links in the description, purchase anything you need. Thank you very much. And thank you, Sweetwater, for sponsoring this video. Let's get on to it. Here we go. Okay, I think we're going to end at the patch bays and how it's all hooked up, and we are going to start with the rest of the gear. Let's go top to bottom here. So first up, we have got another radial power conditioner. I really like these. These also have these panels that pop out that have a bunch of different colors in them. So that's pretty neat. I dig that. We've got a USB charger on these as well. So it's just really convenient, and I like them a lot. They have filtering in them as well, so great. Next up, we have got the SPL Channel 1 Mark III. I did a whole video on this. It's unreal. It sounds fantastic. And a couple things that I didn't expect to be so good was the transient designer built right in. It sounds fantastic. And the EQ sounds fantastic. And the tape saturation sounds fantastic. So I use this sometimes on vocals when I'm mixing. The last mix, I used it on snare drum when I was mixing, because that transient designer is just ridiculous. And it just sounds really classy and really expensive. Next up, the Audioscape ASA 6A. Now, this is a vintage replica of a compressor that it sounds unreal. I actually need to shoot it out between this and my Tube Tech, because I think on some things this might actually beat out the Tube Tech. So I need to do some experimentation. There will likely be a video on this coming very, very soon. Next up, my pair of Coil Audio CA70Ss. These are tube microphone preamps. They got a little bit of EQ on them. I like that we have this negative feedback here that makes things like brighter and like darker and gooier. But they're just a big, gooey, thick sounding mic pre. They sound awesome on bass guitar. They sound awesome on guitars. They sound awesome on acoustic instruments. I've had them for a long time, and I really love them. Okay, bay number 2. The first thing we have is the radial power conditioner yet again. Now, I talked about this in my setup video, but my thought process was having a power conditioner for each bay, so that way I didn't just have, I used to always have to have all the gear on. I would turn one switch and all the gear would turn on, but all this gear creates like a lot of heat, like a whole lot of heat. So I thought, if I had a power conditioner in each bay, I could only ever have the gear running that I'm actually using, which would do, one, it would save electricity, which is great. I don't want to be wasteful. Also, it will save heat. This gear puts out so much heat that it lets my HVAC run far less when I have most of the gear off most of the day. And then I just turn it on only when I'm going to use it. And like, so far, I love that. That has been a game changer in how hard my HVAC is running and just the general feel of the heat in the room. Next up, another radial power conditioner, same one. Next, we've got a 500 chassis here. And first up, we have a pair of Cappy VP28 Platinums. These are absolutely unreal sounding preamps, and I've used them on vocals, on guitars. I've used them on drums before. They're only pre-built, so you can only buy them already built, and they sound fantastic. Next up, you have my pair of signature pre's from Cappy, the Cappy Rune. Now, the sonic differences between these two is that mine have a slightly more aggressive forward mid-range, and the sub bass on mine. Like, mine feels like they hit real deep, maybe around like 60 hertz, like they're deep sounding, as opposed to the Platinums have a much smoother mid-range. They're overall a smoother sounding preamp, and the low end feels like it hits hard, like 80 or 90 hertz. So that's kind of the sonic differences between them. Mine are a little bit more open, a little bit more aggressive and mid-forward, and a little bit deeper sounding, and these are a little bit more smoother, and the low end hits a little bit higher. Next up, we have the Lauren Audio Panther preamps. Now, I actually tested the prototype on those, which I still have over here. This was the prototype that they sent me like a year ago, all point-to-point hand-wired. And it sounded really, really cool, but I was like, you need to tweak a couple things. We need an output stage. We need a pad, like a few things. And so I sent them all of that feedback. And then not too long ago, I ordered the production version. Now, if you don't know Lauren Audio, they make some of my favorite guitar pedals of all time, and I've been talking about them for literally like 6 or 7 years now. I actually have not yet tested these out, the production versions, just because I haven't recorded anything since I've had this room set up exactly how it is right now. So I will be testing these as soon as I track some guitars or vocals, but the prototype sounded incredible, so I expect nothing less of these. Next up, we have a pair of AML 52F50s. Now, these are kind of replicas of some Neve compressors, and they sound really good. So I use these a lot when I'm mixing for piano and for acoustic instruments, acoustic guitar, mandolin, that kind of stuff, but mostly like piano and acoustic instruments. It is kind of a bummer that it takes up 4 500 slots to get a stereo, like to use it on a bus or something, but they sound really good. They're super smooth and natural and transparent sounding. Next up, we have another Cappy LC25. Now, I've used this a ton on bass guitar, and that's what it's over here for. If I decide to use it on bass guitar, it's set up back here, because these are just thick sounding. They sound really good. Next up, the Audioscape AS78. I have done a full video on this, and it is shockingly good. It sounds so good. So this has been, since the day that it showed up, one of my main drum bus, my parallel drum bus compressors. So it's kind of between these two, between the 260 VU and the AS78, and it's awesome. I love that there's a blend knob, so you can have parallel compression right on the box. I love that there's a side chain, like a high pass side chain, built right in. I can't say enough good things about it. And then you've got the 260 VU, which same thing from Audioscape, just sounds absolutely stellar. So parallel drum bus on nearly every song is one of these two. Now, how I choose between them is the 260 VU has more like crack and more like splat. It's like faster and like really aggressive sounding. So if I'm wanting like that, the very front of the transients of the drums being super sharp and then like a kind of more explosive sound, then I use the 260 VU. And if I want a little bit more rounder thing with a little bit longer low end, like I want the low end on the kick drum to last a little bit longer and be a little bit deeper, then I use the AS78. And that's really how I choose between these two. Next up, maybe the most controversial piece of gear I've ever made content on, the Warm Audio WA1B. I'm not going to get too much into why it was controversial, but it's here in my rack, and I really, really like it. I actually did a shootout of this. I did the video on this, and then I also did the shootout between this and the Heritage Audio and the CO1B. And for bass guitar, I genuinely liked the Warm Audio the best of all of them. I felt like it locked the low end down better than the rest. Like 80 to 100 hertz was more consistent on this than it was on the other two. And that's what I'm looking for in a bass guitar compressor. Now, I have not used it since I made that video because I didn't have room in Studio B for it. So in Studio B right now, holy exposure. In Studio B right now, I do have the Heritage Audio and the Audioscape V-Comp. Now these two right here, I'm probably gonna put these head to head with the Warm and see which, like really confirm which I like best for bass guitar, because they're both really great. While we're in here, let's just go over the rack here. We've got a pair of Cappy hiders, original hiders. We've got a pair of Cappy Hider H2s, the new version. We've got another Cappy compressor. We've got a Radial X amp. If I'm reamping guitars, I'm using this. We've got a Radial Ecstasy, which if I'm wanting to mix with guitar pedals, like I want to put an overdrive pedal on someone's vocal or something like that, that's the right thing to do it. Next, we've got the Pope Audio Bax 2020. This is only in here right now because I don't have room in the A room in there, because this sounds really, really good. It's just a high and a low band EQ, and it sounds awesome. It is probably going to find its way back into the main room. Next up, we got the Pope Audio Dirty C, which is just an analog chorus, and it sounds very, very cool. Got the patch bay and a headphone amp and a power conditioner. Back to the main room. Holy exposure. Okay, next up, we have the Audioscape Reverb, the XL305R. And it is so good. I've done a whole video on this as well. It is a 12-spring all analog reverb, and it's just ridiculous. It's vibe for days, and I love it. Now, they did recently just come out with a plug-in version of this, and it really captures it. It's not quite as three-dimensional. Like, it's not the same thing, but this is not cheap, and the plug-in is significantly cheaper. So check the plug-in out, because it's really, really something awesome. All right, next up, third bay. We've got another radio power conditioner, exact same one of all of them. Next up, we've got a pair of Neve 1073s. Now, this top 1073, that's not the digital version, is one of the pieces that Sweetwater gave me and Archie at the end of our rig builders. I can't believe they gave that to us, but they did, and it sounds great. But below it is the digital version, the 1073 SPX-D. And so basically the difference between them is this one, the bottom one, has a built-in conversion in it, along with a headphone amp, and you can blend wet and dry, and you can do all your monitoring. So, like, the cool thing about this one is if you're just trying to do a voiceover thing, or if you're just a singer, songwriter in your own studio, like, you can have just this bottom 1073 and record everything, have no other interface, have no other anything. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to have a video coming out on these very soon, but they sound awesome. Next up, the heart and soul of the entire rig, the Avid Matrix Studio and the Avid HDIO. Now, from here on out is where things start to get pretty nerdy and pretty complicated, so buckle up. When I was researching interfaces to do for Atmos, now, to be fair, this was a year ago, but when I was researching interfaces to set up Atmos, the Avid Matrix Studio, it was the one. It was hands down the one. Several people that I know and really, really trust, they're like, no, just get one of those. It's definitely the choice. Now, there have been some other interfaces come out since I picked this up nearly a year ago that are great. There's nothing wrong with them. But for me, being all in Pro Tools, being with the HD system, wanting to do Atmos, wanting zero latency with all of my hardware inserts when mixing, like, all the room tuning, the flexibility of being able to hook this up via Thunderbolt and through the HDX card, and being able to do wild stuff. Like, you can run this one interface on 2 computers if you want, one computer to pitch, one computer to catch. You can, like, there's just an endless list of stuff that you can do with the Matrix Studio that I don't think exists on any other interface. I still think that this is one of, if not the very best option for what I'm trying to do here, mixing with hardware in a professional studio and setting up Atmos and having to do stereo and Atmos back and forth all the time. And let me tell you something, boy, does it sound good. Like, the clarity in the monitoring, like the clarity here. It's like someone has removed a blanket from my monitors. Like, truly. I know that's a cliche thing to say. Truly what it sounds like. Okay, next up, the Avid HDIO. Now, this is handling all of my hardware inserts when mixing. So anytime I'm putting an insert of hardware on a channel in Pro Tools, this is handling the round trip for all of that hardware. So we've got 16 channels of I/O. So we've got 16 outputs, 16 inputs, which means I can run 16 channels of hardware. But that doesn't mean that I can only run 16 pieces at once, obviously, because, for instance, like on a single insert, like on my mix bus, I've got the PQ, and then that goes to the Bus Plus, and then that goes to my signature pre's, and then that goes to the MBT, and then that goes to the SPL Big. And so all of those pieces of gear are on a single stereo channel of I/O. So channels 1 and 2 on this are running all of those pieces of gear chained together with the flock. We're going to get on to patch bays here in 1 second. Now, this is the workflow that I used to have. I used to have an HD3 rig years ago, and the HD workflow, say whatever you want about how long it's been around, about how much it costs. The workflow, it's the best workflow. It just is the best workflow. No one can convince me otherwise. For how I work, I'm never stepping away from it, like, for the foreseeable future. So on the back side here, which I still have to figure a couple things out, I've got the the HDX card chassis. This is the desktop chassis, and I can't find a good place to put this. So I'm likely going to swap this out for the rack mount chassis, but the HDX card is in there and it will be in the racks. Now, how all of this is hooked up is that chassis in the back with the HDX card is Thunderbolt. So on the back side of the computer here, which is a M2 Max Studio, there's a Thunderbolt cable that goes to the HDX chassis in the back. And then there's DigiLink cables that connect both the computer to both of these interfaces. Now, I have the Thunderbolt card installed in the Matrix Studio, and that is also connected to the computer via Thunderbolt. So this interface is connected to the computer via a DigiLink cable, via the HDX card, and Thunderbolt 3 at the same time. And I probably need to make a whole video about why that's cool. Now, out the back of the Matrix Studio is a couple breakout cables for the outputs for speakers. So I've got 16 XLR outputs on the back of this, DB25 to XLR. And then that is what is connected directly to all of my monitors. And when the Atmos rig goes in, that's how I'm going to connect the Matrix Studio to all of the monitors all the way around the room. Now, the HDIO, I have split in half. So inputs and outputs 1 through 8 are on the Flock patch bay. And I've done a whole video on the Flock. It's incredible. And so what I've done is all of the gear that I use for mixing, like a lot of it, especially all the stuff I use for mastering and for mix bus duties, all of that is hardwired directly to the Flock patch bay, because being able to swap stuff, and I've said this in other videos, but being able to literally open up and do a master and be like, is the MBT the right move? No. Is this Fusion the right move? No. Are my signature pre's the right move? Yes. Perfect. Is the Bus Plus the move? No. Is the Tube Tech the move? Yes. Perfect. And it's like literally that easy and fast to test them. So all of that stuff is running via the Flock, and it's hardwired. The Flock is hardwired into inputs 1 through 8 on the HDIO. Now we get down to the TT patch bays. Now these are a pair of Switchcraft TT patch bays, and how I've got those set is first I have inputs 1 through 16 of the Matrix Studio on that patch bay. So if I'd like to record someone and I would prefer to go use the inputs of the Matrix Studio, they're just on the patch bay down here. And how I get into the system when I'm doing that is I have a couple of these cables. Where are they? I have these cables right here, which are XLR to TT. So I can just run microphones straight into the TT patch bays and then patch them to whatever interface I want. Now, because I have those custom made cables, I can also hook up any inputs and outputs of the flock, because I've got 2 ins and 2 outs here on the front of the flock. So I can attach those to any other piece of gear in the whole studio via the TT patch bay. So anything is able to be connected to absolutely anything. It's fully configurable. I can track through literally any piece of gear, through literally any input on either of the interfaces. So inputs of the Matrix Studio on the TT patch bay. Now, inputs and outputs 9 through 16 of the HDIO are also on the patch bay. And so that way, all of the other gear that I use to mix, like the SPL channel 1, that is actually down here on the TT patch bay. So I can just set a different input and output on the HDIO and then just hard patch it in. So I hope that makes sense how that is all hooked up. Now, there are literally just snakes running, which I talked about this in the other video. These may get holes cut in the floor to put down below the floor. I'm dreading that, but it may happen. I hope that all made sense. I did my best to explain it in a way that hopefully everyone, no matter how new or seasoned you are, would understand. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, drop them down below and I'll do my best to answer everyone. But yeah, I'm really pumped with the setup. I'm really curious to see exactly how long it stays like this. And I'm not tearing the studio back apart anytime soon. I have no plans on doing a remodel, changing the overall setup. I just mean like swapping some gear out. Like, does the SPL channel 1 eventually find its way up front because I use it more than something else up here? Is it like, I'm just curious to know how this shakes out after mixing the next 30 or 40 songs. But that's been it. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to hit the links in the description. And I appreciate each and every one of you being here. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.